Hello and welcome to Golden Geography. Today we're going to be thinking a little bit about our Earth's life support systems, and we're particularly focusing on key question 1. This is for the OCR Geography A-level specification. So key question 1 says, how important are the water and carbon to life on Earth? And there's 3 key questions that are part of this, and we'll look at those each in turn. So key question 1 says 1A, the water and carbon cycle support life on Earth and move between the land, ocean and the atmosphere. Carbon is a really key building block for life on Earth. It is really important for the natural world, for the plants and animals, the flora and fauna that we find around us, and also for us as human beings. Carbon is a really key part of our DNA. We find it in the fats and proteins and carbohydrates that we eat and use as part of our life here on planet Earth. It's also a really key building block, and it can be found in many different forms. Some of the most precious things on our planet, like diamonds, are formed of carbon, and things like coal are formed from carbon too, key for combustion and heat production. So carbon is a really useful, really universal element that we have, and it's really important for life on Earth. We find that carbon moves through a cycle process. It's called the carbon cycle. It moves between land, oceans and the atmosphere in different states. So in the atmosphere, it will tend to be in a gas state. On land, it will tend to be in a solid state. And our human activities influence this natural cycle, but it really is a natural cycle that has taken place for millions and millions of years. 1B. The carbon and water cycle are systems with inputs, outputs and stores. Well, for the carbon, we need to think a little bit about those stores. Some of them are very long-term stores where carbon might have been trapped for millions of years, things like oil or gas or fossilized wood. Others are areas where carbon moves very quickly, for example, through our atmosphere. So the stores that we have for carbon varies. We do have carbon stored in our atmosphere. It holds carbon as carbon dioxide or methane predominantly, and both of those are absolutely essential to life on Earth and regulating our atmosphere and our global temperatures, but can also play a key role in climate change, anthropogenic climate change. Our oceans are a key carbon store. They have a lot of life in our oceans, both flora and fauna that use it, but carbon can also be diffused from the atmosphere into our oceans and stored within our oceans, both in a dissolved or diffused state, but also within sedimentary rock that is created in our oceans and in the oil and gas that's found within that rock. So oceans play a really key part, and it's an area of developing understanding. We are learning more and more about our oceans and the roles they play. There's still lots more to find out. And of course, vegetation, our biosphere, all the plants on our planet are really good at storing carbon within their mass, within their stems, within the wood that they use, particularly our rainforests and our boreal forests, where they trap that carbon into the wood mass. It's a really important store. We also have soil. Soil holds around 1,500 gigatons of carbon. A huge amount of carbon is maintained within our soil, and that's important because our biomass need it. Our plants need to access that carbon, and it's really important for human activity like farming. Our cryosphere, the ice that we have on our planet, can store carbon too. It can be found trapped within it. And of course, as it melts, that cryosphere, it is releasing some of that trapped carbon, particularly methane. We find carbon in water bodies, in lakes and rivers, but really importantly wetlands. And there's some big challenges with wetlands and the loss of wetlands that we've had over the last 200 years or so, and how we need to restore them to trap and capture carbon out of the atmosphere. And carbon can be found within groundwater and sediments too. So we have some really important stores for carbon. Well, what inputs and outputs do we have? If we're looking at the carbon cycle as a whole, one of those key inputs really is photosynthesis, how our plants use carbon both from within the soil but also within the atmosphere and draw it into them using the process of photosynthesis to then transform it and store it as sugars. We can also get carbon precipitation, which is effectively acid rain. It's how a rain will fall and pick up elements of carbon from within the atmosphere, and it will turn that water slightly acidic. When we're looking at outputs, we have a range of outputs too. We have our decomposition, the breaking down of organic materials. We have weathering of rock. We have the respiration from both plants and animals and human beings, and combustion. We'll look at some of these more in detail a little bit later on. But it's all part of that carbon process, that carbon cycle. We've got carbon coming into the cycle, we've carbon going out of the cycle. But remember, it is a cycle, so it is a loop, which means those inputs and outputs can be both processes as well as inputs and outputs. Some of these things, like photosynthesis, are both an input and a process. They have multiple roles within the carbon cycle. So let's have a little look at some of those really distinctive processes within the carbon cycle. Well, photosynthesis, we've already mentioned it, it's done by plants. Predominantly, those plants will have a green colour because of the chlorophyll that's involved in that photosynthetic process. And it will vary from very light shades of green to very dark. But sometimes you will find plants that have a kind of purpley hue or a brownish hue to their leaves, and they can still photosynthesize. Plants don't have to just be on land. We can include seaweed in this. They do photosynthesize too. So that process of capturing the carbon, particularly in that gas form, out of the atmosphere, drawing it into the plant, combining it with water, going through that process of photosynthesis to generate sugars, those carbohydrates that are used then for growth of those plants, is a really key part of the carbon cycle. It's a really key process to move carbon from the atmosphere into our biosphere. And you can see the equation for photosynthesis at the bottom here. You don't need to memorize it, but you can see the process that we're going through. Carbon dioxide plus water and energy, light energy from the sun, into the chlorophyll. The chlorophyll produces then those sugars and oxygen, which for us both are essential for our life. We do have respiration, which is the flip of that. When we're looking at human beings, but also animals around us, we desperately need those sugars that are generated through photosynthesis. And we break those down, and it gives us the energy we need to live. And as we do that, that process of respiration, we breathe in oxygen to facilitate that process, and we breathe out carbon dioxide. So respiration by living organisms, that breaking down of sugars for energy, changes the form that we find carbon in, from that sugar back to a gaseous form. We also have decomposition. Everything can decompose, and decompose is a really key part of that, and they can include enzymes or fungus that can help break things down, as you can see with the apple here. But the key thing to note is the rate of decomposition will vary. If you have very warm and hot environments, decomposition takes place a lot quicker than in cold environments or dry environments. And the product you're trying to decompose will vary too. So things like fruits decompose really rapidly, particularly strawberries and raspberries. But a wooden tree stump will take a lot longer. So the rates of decomposition can vary depending on the temperature, the environmental conditions. but also the form of carbon that you have as well. Another process we have that we need to think about is combustion, and it is a process as well as an output. We have natural forms of combustion like forest fires that occur as part of the natural cycle, the natural carbon cycle, and are important for clearing land and enabling succession to take place and building biodiversity. But we also have human activity, particularly things like flaring. When we're trying to extract oil and gas, any excess gas we have that we don't want, we often flare off. And these are forms of combustion, and human activity, particularly since the start of the Industrial Revolution, has increased those rates of combustion. So we are taking a natural process and massively emphasising it, over-enhancing it, because of our need for energy or our need for materialistic products. So really enhancing that natural process of combustion. We do, and we touched on this already, have oceans on our planet that play a really key part as a natural carbon sink. Naturally, that movement of the waves interacting with the atmosphere will help carbon in the atmosphere to be diffused into our oceans. Well, that's really important. And photosynthesis by both seaweed and phytoplankton is key too, when we have something called a biological pump, where we've got carbon within our marine organisms that are key too. But again, it's something that can also be enhanced by human beings. We can pump carbon into our oceans and dissolve it or try and bury it as well. So it is a natural process, that's the key thing, but it is something that is being explored and maybe exploited by human beings as a way to trap carbon within our oceans. The carbon cycle and the processes within the carbon cycle also include vegetation. It's so key to our planet. Without plants, we would really struggle to have any form of life, and certainly the biodiversity that we have. Photosynthesis and respiration is really key. And those temperatures that we have across our equator and between the tropics are really important, where we do have warm conditions and wet conditions, where plants grow and thrive. Their biomass, their net primary productivity, is at its highest, so they can capture that carbon and lock it away, taking it out of the atmosphere. So that process of photosynthesis and our vegetation is really key. We also have processes within the carbon cycle that are a little bit more complex. So I'm just going to mention them briefly, but they are worth doing a little bit more research. Weathering is key. Weathering is the in situ, that means in place, breaking down of materials. So it is slightly different to erosion. We're particularly talking about breaking down rock here, and you've got chemical weathering or physical weathering or biological weathering that can do that. And when you have carbon-rich rocks like limestone or chalks, when they are weathered, particularly when they experience chemical weathering, that can release carbon back into the atmosphere, but it can also leach it. When you have water passing through these carbon-heavy rocks, it can cause the breaking down and the leaching of the carbon away, which produces fantastic and beautiful limestone environments, but it can also move the sediments that have broken down by weathering to different locations, and particularly into our oceans, where they can build up and form sedimentary rock. Okay, so that's a little bit on the carbon cycle. Please pause the video, have a look here at these 3 different questions. Amber for I get it but I need to review. Green for I really get it, I'm happy. Red for I think I need to stop and have a good think about this and do a bit more research. So red, amber, green, all of these, and then if you need to, go back and watch the video again. Thanks for listening.